While lying in a hospital bed waiting for heart surgery, I accidentally saw a photo of my daughter celebrating a brand new Porsche Cayenne she bought for her mother-in-law. Feeling uneasy, I checked my savings account and discovered thousands of dollars had been taken without my knowledge. I called my daughter and asked what happened to my money. She calmly replied, "Dad, you're confused. You need to rest." I stayed silent, smiled, and decided to find out the truth. I am so grateful you're spending time with Dad's revenge stories. Before we dive deeper, drop a comment telling me your city and country. I love seeing where you're tuning in from. Also, please note, this story includes some fictional elements added for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to existing names or settings is purely coincidental, but the message I'm conveying to you is useful. My name is Walter Calloway. Most people call me Walt. I spent 32 years as a mechanic at a shop on Granger Road in Columbus, Ohio, and I can tell you exactly what a failing engine sounds like before it gives out completely. There is a particular rhythm to it, a hesitation, a catch, something slightly off in the timing that most people mistake for normal. They keep driving. They ignore it. And then one morning, they are standing on the side of the road, wondering how they never saw it coming. I should have recognized that sound in my own life. Lord knows I had heard it enough times in other people's. It was a Tuesday morning in September, the kind of morning that comes in Ohio when summer has finally given up arguing and autumn moves in without asking. The trees outside my window at the Wexner Medical Center had just started turning at the edges, burnt orange bleeding into green at the tips of the branches. I had been watching those trees for 11 days. When you are waiting for open-heart surgery, you notice things like that. The color of leaves, the way the light moves across a ceiling, the particular sound a blood pressure cuff makes when it tightens around your arm. A 94/62, said the nurse Patricia Okafor Pat, she told me on the first day, because nobody who was going to see her every morning for 2 weeks needed to be formal about it. She had been a cardiac care nurse for 26 years, and she had the kind of calm that only comes from spending 2 decades in rooms where people are genuinely afraid. She wrote my numbers on the whiteboard by the door with a blue marker, same as every morning, then glanced at me over her shoulder. "Better than yesterday. It's like high praise," I said. She smiled without turning around. In this unit, Mr. Calloway, better than yesterday is the goal. I liked Pat. She did not treat me like a problem to be managed. She treated me like a person who happened to have a heart valve that had decided to stop cooperating after 68 years of reasonable service. That was fair enough. 68 years is a long time to ask anything to keep working without complaint. The surgery was scheduled for the end of the month, pending final cardiology clearance. Dr. James Whitfield had explained the procedure to me twice, a valve replacement, minimally invasive, if my pressure held steady, more involved if it did not. I had $180,000 sitting in a savings account at Fifth Third Bank, built over 30 years of putting away whatever was left after the bills. Maggie and I used to call it the floor money, the amount below which we would not let the account fall no matter what. It was not wealth. It was the opposite of poverty. There is a difference, and anyone who has ever been one bad month away from zero knows exactly what that difference feels like. I had my floor money. I had a surgery date. I had 11 days of watching the leaves turn from a hospital bed. Things were not good, but they were organized, and organized is something I have always been able to work with. Then my phone buzzed on the bedside table. I reached for it without thinking, a reflex, the same way you reach for a wrench when you hear a particular sound without having to decide to do it first. The notification was from Instagram. I did not use Instagram much. Diane had set up the account for me 2 Christmases ago, so I could see photos of the grandchildren she kept promising were coming someday. Mostly, I used it to look at pictures of vintage engine restorations, and occasionally to see what my daughter was doing with her life when she did not feel like calling. The notification said Diane Calloway Marsh had posted a new photo. I tapped it. The image loaded slowly on my hospital Wi-Fi, the way images do when the connection cannot quite commit. First, the background, a gleaming showroom floor, white tile, bright overhead lights. Then a vehicle enormous and glossy, the color of midnight blue, catching the light, like something that knew it was being looked at. A Porsche Cayenne. Brand new from the look of it. The kind of vehicle that costs more than most people make in 3 years. Then the figures standing beside it came into focus. Diane, my daughter, 38 years old, in a white sundress I had never seen before. Her mother-in-law, a woman named Gloria Marsh, laughing with her chin tipped back. Brandon, my son-in-law, one hand on the hood of the Porsche, like he was posing for an advertisement. And Diane's face bright open, genuinely delighted in a way that made something cold move through my chest before my mind had finished reading the caption. The best for the best, Gloria, you deserve every bit of this and more. Welcome to the family, gorgeous. I set the phone down on my chest and looked at the ceiling. Pat came back in to check the IV line, and she glanced at my face the way nurses do when they have learned to read the room without being told what is in it. She did not ask. She checked the line, made a note on her tablet, and said, "You need anything, Mr. Calloway?" "No," I said. "I'm fine." That was not true, but I did not yet know what the true thing was. I only knew that a mechanic's instinct, the same one that had kept me employed for 32 years, the one that heard the hesitation in an engine before the driver ever felt it was telling me that something was wrong. Not the kind of wrong that comes with a simple explanation. The kind of wrong that once you start pulling at it keeps coming. I picked up the phone again. I opened my banking application. My savings account at Fifth Third Bank. The one with the floor money. The one I had not touched since writing a check to the hospital for the surgical deposit 6 weeks ago. My thumb hovered over the screen. Outside the window, a gust of wind moved through the maple tree, and a single orange leaf detached and fell without any hurry at all, as if it had simply decided it was time. I pressed the button. The numbers loaded one line at a time. That is the thing about the Fifth Third Bank mobile application. It does not give you the full picture at once. It builds the history from the most recent transaction backward, line by line, date by date, and if you are not paying attention, you might scroll past the first few entries and think you understand what you are looking at before you actually do. I was paying attention. The most recent transaction was from 8 days ago. A withdrawal. $4,300. The memo field said simply, personal. I scrolled down. 6 days before that, another withdrawal. $8,200. Memo personal. Before that, $11,000. Memo personal. I kept scrolling, and the word personal kept appearing over and over like a door someone had left open in a house where all the furniture had already been moved out. I set the phone face down on the blanket. I picked it back up. I set it down again. Then I did what I had always done when a repair job turned out to be worse than the estimate. I took a breath, I picked up my tools, and I looked at the full damage without flinching. I scrolled to the beginning of the transaction history. 18 months back. March of the previous year. The account had held $178,000 at that point, my life's floor built from 32 years of putting away whatever was left after the mortgage and the groceries and Maggie's medical bills in those last 2 years. I had not touched it since writing the surgical deposit check. I had not touched it because I did not need to touch it. That money was not for spending. It was for surviving, except that someone had been spending it. 11 transfers over 18 months, each one marked personal, each one moving between $8,000 and $14,000 at a time. The math was not complicated, and I had always been good at math. You cannot run a shop for 3 decades without understanding numbers at a level most people find tedious. $119,400. Gone. Withdrawn in careful, patient intervals, the way water finds its way through a crack in an engine block, slowly enough that you might not notice until the damage is already done. My chest did something then that had nothing to do with my heart valve. It tightened from the inside, the way a lug nut tightens when you put the torque wrench to it 1/2 turn too many. I pressed my hand flat against my sternum, not because I was in physical pain, but because I needed something solid to push back against. Maggie would have known what to do. That was my first thought, and I am not ashamed of it. After 41 years of marriage, the habit of turning toward her was built into me the way certain motions are built into a mechanic's hands, automatic, without decision, just the body knowing where to reach. She had been gone 5 years, and I still reached. I remembered the last January before she got sick, the two of us sitting at the kitchen table in the house on Marigold Drive, doing the annual accounting together the way we always had. Maggie with her reading glasses on writing figures in a yellow legal pad, in her careful schoolteacher's cursive. Walt, she had said, looking up at me over the tops of her glasses, as long as we have this floor, nothing can take the ground out from under us. I had agreed. I had believed it completely. I lay back against the hospital pillow and stared at the ceiling tiles, and did the thing I have learned to do when a situation is bad. I did not catastrophize, and I did not minimize. I looked at the facts in the order they existed. Fact 1, $119,000 had been removed from my account over 18 months. Fact 2, the memo on every single transfer said personal, which was not a category I had ever used for my own withdrawals. Fact 3, I had not set up any automatic transfers from this account. Not ever, not once in 30 years. Fact 4, Diane was an authorized user on this account, added 7 years ago when Maggie first got her diagnosis, and we had wanted someone who could help manage things if one of us was not able. I had trusted her with access to the floor because she was my daughter. Because you trust your children with the things that matter. Because Maggie and I had raised her to understand what the floor was and why you did not touch it. I picked up the phone and called her. It rang twice. Then her voice came on warm, easy, the particular warmth of someone who has not been caught yet. "Hey, Dad." A pause, brief and light as a soap bubble. "How are you feeling today? Is everything okay?" I held the phone against my ear and listened to the steadiness in her voice. And I felt something shift inside me, not anger, not yet. Something quieter. The particular stillness that comes over you in a garage when you have just run the diagnostic and the results are sitting on the screen and you already know before you even read them that the repair is going to cost more than the car is worth. "I'm looking at my bank account, Diane," I said. My voice came out level, calm as a Sunday. "I need you to help me understand something." The pause on her end lasted exactly 1 second longer than it should have. "Of course, Dad," she said. "What's going on?" Outside my window, the maple tree was perfectly still. Not a single leaf moved. The whole world seemed to be holding its breath, waiting to hear what she would say next, waiting to find out what kind of story we were all going to have to live inside from this moment forward. I waited too. "What's going on?" she said again, softer this time, with a little current of concern running underneath the words like something she had switched on deliberately. I had heard that voice before. Not from Diane, from customers. 32 years in the shop, and you learn to recognize the voice a person uses when they already know what the problem is, and they are buying themselves time to decide how much of the truth they are willing to admit to. It is a particular kind of warmth. Careful. Manufactured the way a showroom is manufactured, everything placed just so nothing left out where it might raise a question. There are 11 withdrawals from my savings account, I said. Going back 18 months. $119,000, Diane. I need you to tell me what happened to that money. A beat of silence. Then she laughed. Not a big laugh. Not the guilty, overcompensating kind that gives people away in movies. It was small and light and dismissive, the kind of laugh that says you are being a little bit ridiculous, and she is too fond of you to say so directly. Dad. She said, drawing the word out the way you do with a child who has said something that does not quite make sense. Dad, that's okay. First of all, are you sure you're looking at the right account? You have the joint checking and the savings. Remember, sometimes those statements can look confusing if you're not. I know which account I am looking at, I said. I have had that account for 30 years. I know what my savings account looks like. Okay. Her voice shifted slightly, still warm, but with a new texture in it. Something smoother, more deliberate. I hear you. I'm just saying the medications they have you on right now, some of them can cause confusion. Dr. Whitfield mentioned that to me when I called to check on you last week. Memory issues, trouble concentrating. It's totally normal with what you're going through, Dad. It doesn't mean anything is wrong with you, it just means… Diane. My voice came out flat and hard the way a wrench comes down on a bolt that has been stripped. I am not confused. I am reading numbers off a screen. I need you to answer the question. She exhaled. Long and slow, the exhale of a person who is recalibrating, deciding which direction to move next. I had watched enough people do it across service counters to know exactly what was happening on the other end of that phone line. Dad, listen to me. Her voice dropped lower, now gentler, the way a person lowers their voice when they want you to feel like they are letting you in on something private. I think what might have happened is someone may have gotten your account information. Identity theft is so common right now, especially targeting people in medical situations, because the banks flag less activity. We should call Fifth Third together. I can help you file a fraud report. We can get this sorted out. Okay, I'll drive up this afternoon and we can… The transfers were made from inside the account, I said. Not from outside. There was no breach. The bank's security flagged nothing because whoever made those transfers had authorized access. The line went very quiet. Not the quiet of someone thinking, the quiet of someone who has just watched the door they were planning to walk through close in front of them and is now looking for another one. Dad, she said finally. Her voice had changed again. The warmth was still there, but underneath it now was something else. A faint tightening, like a wire pulled 1 degree past comfortable. I think you need to rest. You're under enormous stress right now. You've got a major surgery coming up, you're in a hospital, you're on a lot of medications, and it makes complete sense that your mind is… Are you telling me, I said slowly, that I am imagining $119,000? I'm telling you that you need to take care of yourself right now and not get worked up over something that we can figure out together when you're feeling better. A pause. Then softer. I love you, Dad. I just don't want you hurting yourself by stressing over things that might have a perfectly simple explanation. I sat with the phone pressed to my ear, and I breathed in and I breathed out, and I looked at the maple tree outside my window, which had gone back to moving gently in the morning wind, unconcerned with any of this. My daughter had just told me with great tenderness that I was losing my mind. She had done it carefully. She had done it with love in her voice and concern stitched into every syllable. And if I had not spent 3 decades learning to hear the difference between what an engine is doing and what a customer is telling me it is doing, I might have believed her. I might have set the phone down and wondered whether I had in fact misread the screen, whether the medications were affecting my memory, whether I was the problem. Instead, I felt something harden in the center of my chest. Not anger, not yet. Something older and quieter than anger. The thing that settles into a mechanic's hands when he has diagnosed a problem correctly, and the owner is standing there insisting the car is fine. The certainty. "I'll let you go," I said. My voice was perfectly even. "I know you're busy." "Dad." "Goodbye, Diane." I ended the call. I set the phone face up on the blanket this time. Screen still lit, the banking application still open behind it. The numbers had not changed. They were not going to change. Numbers do not rearrange themselves out of loyalty or love. That had always been the thing I trusted most about them. I lay back and closed my eyes. At 11 o'clock that night, my phone buzzed once on the bedside table. A voicemail notification. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. I was half asleep, the room dark except for the glow of the monitoring equipment, the ward outside my door gone quiet, the way hospital wards go quiet after visiting hours like a held breath. But something made me reach for it. The same instinct that makes you turn back to an engine you thought you had finished with, because you heard one note that did not belong. I pressed play. The voicemail was 47 seconds long. I know that because I played it 4 times, and by the 4th time, I had the whole thing memorized, the way you memorize a repair manual entry for a problem you never want to misdiagnose again. 47 seconds. The length of time it takes to walk from one end of a hospital corridor to the other. The length of time it takes for a person's understanding of his own life to be completely and permanently rearranged. The voice that came out of my phone speaker belonged to my son-in-law, Brandon Marsh. I recognized it immediately, that particular brand of loud that certain men wear like a cologne. The kind of voice that fills a room not because it has anything worth saying, but because it has decided somewhere along the way that volume is the same thing as authority. I had never liked Brandon. I had never said so because Diane loved him, and Maggie had taught me that you keep certain opinions inside the garage and off the driveway. But I had never liked him. He was talking to someone he called Kev. His words were slightly slurred at the edges the way words get when a man has had 3 or 4 drinks and has stopped monitoring the distance between what he thinks and what he says out loud. "Kev man, listen. Di just texted me, everything is moving. The old man is still in the hospital, right? He's not going anywhere." A burst of laughter, short and loose. Get this, he actually called her today. He figured out something was off with the account. She handled it, man. She told him he was losing his mind. You should have heard her, she was so good. More laughter, lower this time, the intimate laugh of 2 people sharing something they believe no one else can hear. Here's the thing though, Kev. Here is the actual thing. Old Walt's not gonna make it past the surgery anyway. Di already looked into it. His valve is in bad shape, like bad. So we figure worst case, we let the surgery happen, and then we contest the will after. But best case. A pause, the sound of ice shifting in a glass. Best case, we get him to sign the property paperwork before he goes under the knife. The land out in Licking County. Do you know what that acreage is worth right now? The market out there is insane. We're talking 400 grand easy. Another pause. DI's got it handled, man. She's going in tomorrow with the documents. He's 68 years old and he's scared and he's alone in a hospital bed. It's not gonna be hard. The voice dropped into something that was almost fond, the way a person sounds when they are admiring something they consider clever. Worst case, we contest the will. Dude has no one else. Who's gonna fight us? The recording ended. I set the phone down on the bedside table. I placed it very carefully the way you place a tool back in its exact spot in the toolbox after you have finished a job. Because putting things back in their right places is the kind of habit that keeps a shop running and a man sane. Then I pressed both hands flat against my thighs, and I breathed. My heart monitor registered something. I heard the rhythm change, a small quickening, the machine noticing what I was working hard, not to show. I breathed again, slower this time. In through the nose, out through the mouth, the way Dr. Whitfield had shown me in our first consultation. Keep the pressure down, Mr. Calloway. Stress is your enemy right now. Yes, I thought. I am becoming aware of that. Brandon had called this number by mistake. His contact list had a Walter K., some friend or associate with the same first name. And my number had been one entry away in his phone, and he had been drunk enough not to notice the difference. That was all. 47 seconds of his real voice talking about me the way a person talks about a problem they are close to solving. Talking about my surgery like it was a deadline. Talking about the land on Licking County like it was already in his pocket. Talking about my daughter handling things and his absolute confidence, easy and untroubled, as a man counting money he has already spent, that there was no one who would fight them. I thought about what my shop foreman used to say about certain cars that came in for a second opinion after another mechanic had already worked on them. He would pull the hood, take one look, and say whoever did this knew exactly what they were doing. He never meant it as a compliment. Diane had told me I was confused. She had said it with love in her voice, with worry stitched carefully into every word. And for approximately 3 seconds, a part of me, the part that had held her when she was 2 days old and smelled like something new and perfect, had wanted to believe her. Had reached for the explanation the way a tired man reaches for the nearest chair. Brandon's voicemail had taken that chair away. I was not confused. I had never been confused. I was a 68-year-old man with a failing heart valve and $119,000 missing, and a son-in-law who had just told a man named Kev in 47 careless seconds exactly what my life was worth to the two of them. I reached over to the bedside table and opened the notes application on my phone. I typed the date, the time, and the words voicemail received from Brandon Marsh, unknown number, duration 47 seconds. Do not delete. Then I opened my email and forwarded the voicemail audio file to my own address, the one I had used for shop correspondence for 20 years, and which only I had access to. I did it slowly and carefully because my hands had started to tremble, not from fear, but from the particular physical release of a man who has been holding something very tightly for a very long time, and has only just allowed himself to feel the weight of it. Outside the window, Columbus was dark. The maple tree was invisible against the night sky, just a shape, a suggestion of branches. Somewhere down the hall, a cart moved past my door wheels, quiet on the linoleum. Tomorrow Diane was coming with documents. I lay back against the pillow and looked at the ceiling, and I thought about what Maggie used to say when I came home from a bad day at the shop. Some job that had gone sideways, some problem that had turned out to be bigger than anyone had estimated. She would sit across from me at the kitchen table and wrap both hands around her coffee mug and say, "Walt, the only way out of a broken engine is through it. You know that better than anybody." I knew it. I reached for the phone one more time and scrolled through my contacts to a name I had not dialed in over a year. Frank Dellinger. Retired attorney. The man who had argued with me about bowling scores in 1989 and been my closest friend ever since. I did not call yet. It was nearly midnight, and Frank was 70 years old and deserved his sleep. But I found the name, and I held it on the screen, a small, steady point of light in the dark room, and I let myself feel the relief of knowing it was there. Tomorrow, I thought. First thing tomorrow. She arrived at 8:45 in the morning, before I had finished my breakfast tray, and before I had made the call to Frank. I heard her before I saw her. The particular sound of Diane's heels on a linoleum floor, a brisk, purposeful rhythm that I had known since she was a teenager, walking through the garage to ask me for the car keys. She had always walked like someone who expected the room to rearrange itself around her arrival. Some things do not change no matter how old a person gets, or how old their father gets, or how many hospital beds stand between them and the life they are used to living. She pushed the door open with her shoulder because both her hands were full. In her left hand, a white paper bag from Benny's Donuts on Fifth Avenue, the shop I had gone to every Saturday morning for 11 years, the one that made them maple glazed the way I liked them, heavy on the glaze, just slightly warm. In her right hand, a leather tote bag that sat against her hip, with the particular weight of something that had more inside it than a change of clothes. "Morning, Dad." Her smile was bright and immediate, the kind that arrives fully formed like it had been assembled in the car on the way over. She set the donut bag on the tray table and leaned down to kiss my forehead, and I let her because I needed her close enough to see her eyes when I said what I was going to say. "I brought your favorites. Maple glazed. Benny's still puts too much glaze on them, just the way you like it." "Thank you," I said. "Sit down, Diane." Something moved across her face, quick, almost imperceptible, the way a shadow moves across a wall when a cloud passes the sun. Then she smiled again and pulled the visitor's chair close to the bed and sat down, crossing her ankles the way her mother had always told her to sit in polite company. The leather tote went on the floor beside her feet. "How are you feeling?" she asked. "Did you sleep okay? Your color looks better than last week." "I slept fine," I said. "I want to talk about the account." She drew a breath, careful, measured. "Dad, I've been thinking about that, and I really think the best thing is for us to call Fifth Third together and—" "Did I have the statements printed?" I said. I reached into the drawer of my bedside table and took out the folded pages I had asked Pat to help me print from the hospital's business center the previous afternoon before any of this had fully settled into shape. But after enough of it had that I knew I was going to need paper in my hands. I unfolded them and smoothed them flat on the blanket and turned them so she could read the numbers from where she sat. 11 transfers, 18 months, $119,400. Every one of them marked personal. "I need you to tell me what each of those transfers was for." Diane looked at the papers. She looked at them for a long time, long enough that I could watch the calculation happening behind her eyes. Not guilt, not shame, but calculation. The rapid, precise kind that a person does when they are deciding which version of the truth is still available to them. Then the smile came back, but it was different now. Thinner. Like a coat of paint applied over something that was not properly primed. "Dad." Her voice dropped to a register I recognized, the one she had used since she was 16 to signal that she was about to say something she expected to hurt, and had decided to say anyway. "You're 68 years old. You're about to have major heart surgery. What exactly were you going to do with all that money?" "Sit on it." My chest tightened. I kept my face still. "That money," I said, "was for my surgery, for my recovery, for whatever comes after." "And you'll have it," she said, spreading her hands in a gesture of such practiced reasonableness that I almost admired it. "Brandon and I are going to make sure you're taken care of, Dad. That's what family does. You don't need to be hoarding $180,000 in a savings account like you're still worried about the mortgage. That's what I'm here for." The door opened. Brandon stepped in without knocking. He was wearing a collared shirt with the sleeves rolled up, the kind of deliberate casualness that men like him deploy when they want to look relaxed and be taken seriously at the same time. He was 41 years old, broad across the shoulders, with the kind of tan that comes from weekends on someone else's boat. He looked at me in the hospital bed, the way a contractor looks at a property he is already mentally renovating. Walt. Not a question. Not a greeting. Just my name dropped into the room like a set of keys onto a counter. Brandon, I said. He pulled up a chair without being invited, turned it around and sat on it, backward arms folded across the top rail, looking at me with an expression that sat somewhere between impatience and pity. Look, we're not here to make this complicated. Dee just wants to make sure you're protected. You're going into surgery, you need someone managing your affairs. That's it. Simple. Is that what she told you? I said. Something shifted in his jaw. A small tightening. We brought some paperwork. He nodded at the leather tote by Diane's feet. Just basic stuff. Power of attorney so Di can handle the bills while you're recovering. Standard thing. Everybody does it. I looked at the tote bag. I looked at Brandon. I looked at my daughter who was watching me with an expression I had never seen on her face before. Not love, not worry, but the particular focused attention of someone waiting to see which way a negotiation breaks. Pat appeared in the doorway. She looked at Brandon sitting backward on the chair at Diane with her hands folded too neatly in her lap at the papers spread across my blanket. She took all of it in without a word, the way a nurse with 26 years of experience takes in a room. Then she looked at me. Before anyone could speak, a knock came from behind her. Dr. Whitfield stepped into the doorway, chart in hand, his face carrying the particular gravity of a man who has news he would prefer to deliver privately. "Mr. Calloway," he said. "I'm sorry to interrupt. Is now a good time to talk about the financial clearance for your procedure?" Dr. Whitfield was not a man who wasted words. In the 3 weeks I had known him, he had spoken to me in the precise economical way that surgeons speak when they have learned that extra language tends to produce extra panic, and extra panic is bad for cardiac patients. He said what needed to be said, and he stopped. I had respected that about him from the first appointment, because it reminded me of the way a good mechanic talks to a customer. Here is what is wrong, here is what it costs to fix it, here is what happens if you decide not to. He looked at Diane and Brandon with the particular expression of a professional who has walked into a room that is more complicated than he expected and has chosen not to acknowledge the complication directly. "Mr. Calloway," he said again, "would you prefer to speak privately? Whatever you need to say," I told him, "you can say in front of my family." I used the word deliberately. Family. I watched it land on Brandon, who shifted his weight on the backward chair and said nothing, and on Diane, whose chin lifted by approximately 1/4 of an inch in the way it always had since she was 7 years old and felt she was being evaluated. Dr. Whitfield stepped fully into the room and consulted his chart. Though I suspected he had the numbers memorized, and the chart was more habit than necessity. "We've completed the final pre-surgical financial clearance review," he said. "The surgical deposit you submitted covered the initial costs. However, based on the updated anesthesiology and post-operative care estimates, there is a remaining balance of $47,000 that will need to be confirmed before we can lock in the operating room schedule." The number landed in the room like something dropped from a height. "How long do I have?" I asked. 72 hours, Dr. Whitfield said. "After that, we release the surgical slot. Given your current valve function, I would strongly prefer not to delay. Every week we wait increases the procedural risk. I want to be straightforward with you about that." "I understand," I said. "Thank you, doctor." He gave a short nod, looked once more at Diane and Brandon with an expression that communicated nothing and everything simultaneously, and walked out, pulling the door most of the way closed behind him. The room went tight. Brandon unfolded himself from the backward chair and stood up to his full height, and I could see him doing the arithmetic in real time, the 47,000, the 72 hours, the paperwork in the leather tote, that was suddenly both more and less useful than it had been 60 seconds ago. His jaw worked once. Then he looked at Diane. "We should talk outside," he said to her. "You should both go," I said. Brandon looked at me. He looked at me the way a man looks at an obstacle he has just reassessed and found to be more solid than he originally estimated. His mouth opened, and for a moment I thought he was going to say something. Push back, reassert, deploy the breezy authority he had walked in with. Instead, something in my face stopped him. I do not know what it was. I only know that I had spent 32 years looking at problems without flinching, and whatever Brandon saw in my eyes that morning, it was not the frightened old man he had described to his friend Kev the night before. "Fine," he said. He put his hand on Diane's shoulder, not gently the way a husband touches a wife, but firmly the way a manager redirects an employee. "Come on." Diane picked up the leather tote from the floor. She looked at me once before she left, and in that look I saw something I had not expected, not calculation, not the smooth, social confidence she had worn all morning, but something rawer and faster gone before I could name it. The door closed behind them. I sat alone in the room and listened to the monitoring equipment and the distant sound of the corridor and the particular silence that fills a hospital room when the people who were making noise have left. 72 hours. I looked at the clock on the wall above the whiteboard, one of those institutional clocks with a white face and a red second hand that moves in distinct, deliberate ticks rather than a smooth sweep. I had been watching that clock for 11 days without thinking much about it. Now I watched the red hand move, and I thought about what 72 hours meant in practical terms. It meant I had until Friday morning. My savings account had $58,000 remaining, enough to cover the $47,000 balance with $11,000 left over if every cent of it was still accessible and had not been touched since I last checked. I was not certain of that anymore. I was not certain of anything involving that account anymore. I thought about Maggie. Not the Maggie of the last 2 years when the illness had made everything small and careful and frightening, but the Maggie of the middle years, the one who used to sit in the garage on Saturday afternoons, reading paperback novels while I worked, who would look up every so often and say something that seemed unconnected to anything and turned out later to be exactly what I needed to hear. She had said to me once in the kitchen on Marigold Drive during a winter when the shop was slow and money was tighter than either of us, "Let on to Diane Walt, the hardest thing about asking for help is convincing yourself you deserve it. You spend your whole life being the one people call. You forget you're allowed to make a call too." I had never forgotten that. I had just never needed to use it before. I reached for the phone on the bedside table. I opened my contacts. Frank Dellinger's name sat exactly where I had left it the night before, a small, steady light on the screen. I pressed call. It rang once, twice. Then a voice came on low, unhurried, slightly rough the way voices are when a man has been awake for a while but has not yet had his second cup of coffee. "Walt." Not a question. Frank had always had caller ID and had always answered like he had been half expecting you, regardless of when you called. "It's early. Talk to me." I pressed my free hand flat against the blanket, feeling the cheap cotton weave under my palm, solid and real. Outside, the maple tree caught the morning light, and the leaves that had started turning at the edges last week had turned a little further overnight, the orange spreading inward toward the stem. "Frank," I said, "I need you. Not as a friend this time. As a lawyer." A pause. short and complete the pause of a man who has just shifted gears. "I'll be there by 9, Frank said and hung up. Frank Dellinger arrived at 9 o'clock exactly, which did not surprise me. In 34 years of friendship, Frank had been late to exactly two things: his own retirement party, because he had stopped to help a former client with a filing deadline on the way out the door, and his wife Carol's 65th birthday dinner for the same reason. He was constitutionally incapable of prioritizing himself over a problem that needed solving, which was either his greatest flaw or his finest quality, depending on which side of it you were standing on. Today, I was standing on the right side, and I was grateful for it in a way that sat low in my chest and did not have a clean word attached to it. He came through the door carrying 2 cups of coffee from the shop on the ground floor of the medical building, the decent one, not the vending machine, and a worn leather briefcase that I recognized from the first time I had ever seen him in a professional context, which was 30 years ago, when he helped me and Maggie set up our wills after Diane was born. The briefcase was the same one. Frank was meticulous about things that worked. He did not replace what did not need replacing. He was 70 years old, shorter than me by 2 inches, with white hair he kept cut close and reading glasses perpetually pushed up on his forehead, even when he was not reading. He wore a dark blue button-down shirt with no tie, retired, but not entirely the way certain men retire, the way a river narrows without ever fully stopping. He set 1 coffee cup on my tray table, pulled the visitor's chair to the side of the bed rather than directly in front of it, the way you sit beside a person rather than across from them, and lowered himself into it with the careful economy of a man whose knees have opinions about stairs. Then he looked at me. "You look terrible," he said. "Thank you," I said. "I've had a difficult week. Tell me." He opened the briefcase on his knees, took out a yellow legal pad and a pen, and held the pen ready without writing anything yet. Frank had told me once that the most important legal skill he had ever developed was knowing when to write and when to simply listen. He was in listening mode now, the pen held lightly, the pad balanced on the briefcase, his eyes on my face. So I told him everything in the order it had happened, the way I would describe a repair job, starting with what the customer reported, moving to what I found when I opened the hood, and ending with the full diagnosis. The Instagram post, the banking application, the 11 transfers over 18 months, the phone call with Diane, and the way she had told me I was losing my mind with such practiced tenderness that for 3 seconds I had almost believed her. The voicemail from Brandon, I played it for him, holding the phone between us so he could hear every word, and I watched Frank's face as he listened. He did not react visibly, his jaw did not tighten, his expression did not change. He simply listened with the absolute still attention of a man who has learned that his first reaction to information is less useful than his second. When the voicemail ended, he was quiet for a moment. He wrote something on the legal pad. Then he looked up. "The voicemail," he said. "You forwarded it to your personal email last night, immediately after I heard it." He nodded once, the nod of a man checking a box. "Good. Don't delete anything. Don't move anything. Don't change any passwords or account settings yet." He made another note. The transfers were, they wire transfers, ACH or withdrawals. AC transfers, I said. AC stood for Automated Clearinghouse, the standard electronic network that American banks use to move money between accounts. It was the same system used for direct deposit and automatic bill payment, unremarkable in ordinary circumstances, and in these circumstances, a paper trail as clear and specific as a set of tire tracks in fresh concrete. Each one initiated from inside the account. Diane has had authorized user access for 7 years. Authorized user or joint account holder. Authorized user. Her name is not on the account. Only her access credentials. Frank wrote for several seconds without speaking. I drank the coffee he had brought. It was better than the vending machine, which was not saying much, but it was hot, and it gave my hands something to do. Outside the window, the morning had fully arrived, the kind of clean Ohio September morning that makes you forget the summer was ever as hot as it was the sky, a hard, clear blue above the tree line. "Walk me through the day you gave her access," Frank said. I did. 2016. Maggie's first diagnosis. The oncologist had used the phrase early stage with enough confidence that we had not yet entered the territory of making practical arrangements. But Maggie had insisted. She had said, "Walt, we are not the kind of people who wait until something is on fire before we find the fire extinguisher." She had sat at the kitchen table on Marigold Drive with a cup of tea going cold beside her and a notepad in front of her, and she had been more organized in that moment than I had ever been in my life, listing the things we needed to do in order without drama. Adding Diane as authorized user on the savings account had been item 4 on that list. Frank listened without interrupting. When I finished, he set the pen down on the legal pad and looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, which had slid from his forehead to the bridge of his nose at some point during the conversation, without either of us noticing. "All right," he said. "I want to pull the full transaction history myself directly from Fifth Third with proper documentation. I also want to look at anything connected to Diane's own accounts that might show where the money moved after it left yours." He picked up the pen again. "I'm going to need you to sign a limited power of attorney, giving me authority to request those records on your behalf. Not the kind Brandon wanted you to sign this morning, a narrow, specific documented authorization with a defined scope and an end date. Nothing open-ended." "I understand the difference," I said. "I know you do." He almost smiled, not quite, but close enough. "That's why I'm not explaining it twice." He reached into the briefcase and produced a form pre-drafted, the kind a careful attorney carries, because certain situations recur often enough that preparation is simply good practice. He set it on my tray table. "Read it before you sign it, Walt. I mean that. Even from me." I read it. It said exactly what he had said it said. I signed it. Frank took the form, slid it into a folder, and opened his laptop on the briefcase. His fingers moved over the keyboard with the deliberate two-fingered efficiency of a man who learned to type before typing was considered a skill worth developing. He pulled up the Fifth Third Bank secure portal for legal representatives, entered his bar number and authorization code, and began requesting the records. I watched him work and felt something I had not felt since the morning of that first Instagram notification, not hope exactly, but its immediate neighbor. The particular steadiness that comes when you have handed a problem to someone who knows what to do with it. Frank worked in silence for 4 minutes. Then he stopped. He looked at the screen. He looked at it for long enough that I noticed. "Walt," he said, without looking up. His voice had changed, not dramatically, but in the way a barometer changes before weather arrives, a small, measurable shift in pressure. "The Porsche. The one in the Instagram photo. Do you know how much a new Porsche Cayenne costs?" "Around 120,000, I said. "Give or take." Frank nodded slowly, still looking at the screen. "One of your transfers, 14 months ago. $9,400. He paused. 3 days later, another transfer. 11,000. Then another. Frank scrolled slowly, the way a person scrolls when they are not looking for something specific, but following a thread. He exhaled once through his nose. "Walt, the Porsche is just the beginning." He turned the laptop so I could see the screen. I had spent 32 years reading diagnostic reports, engine codes, compression test results, fuel system analyses laid out in columns and numbers that told you, if you knew how to read them, exactly what had gone wrong and approximately how long it had been going wrong before anyone noticed. Frank's screen looked nothing like a diagnostic report. It was a spreadsheet of bank transactions, plain and unadorned black text on white background. But I knew how to read it, and what it told me was the same thing a bad diagnostic always tells you: the problem started earlier than you thought, and it ran deeper than you were prepared for. Frank pointed to the first entry he had flagged. This transfer 14 months ago, $9,400. I traced the destination account. It's a credit card payment, a card in Diane's name issued through Chase. I pulled the merchant records available through the legal request. He paused. Nordstrom. Neiman Marcus. A spa in Naples, Florida called Tranquility Cove. 3 visits in 1 month, each over $800. I said nothing. I looked at the numbers and I breathed. Below that. Frank moved his finger down the screen. $11,000 3 weeks later. Different destination. A tuition payment to Westbrook Academy, that's a private school in Dublin, Ohio. Annual tuition runs about $32,000 a year. He looked at me over his reading glasses. Do Diane and Brandon have children in school? They have one, I said. 7 years old, 2nd grade. Frank nodded and made a note. $32,000 a year in private school tuition, partially funded over the past 14 months by your savings account. He scrolled down without hurrying the way a person scrolls when they have already processed their own reaction to the information and are now focused entirely on delivering it to someone else at a manageable pace. Here, 6 months ago, $14,000. This one went to a travel agency, Brightwater Travel in Westerville. I cross-referenced with publicly available records. Brandon's company filed a travel expense report the same month for a trip to Cancun. 5 people. Business class. 5 people, I said. T. Brandon, Diane, Gloria Marsh, and 2 others I haven't identified yet. He closed the spreadsheet tab and opened a second one. I want to show you the full picture, Walt, because I need you to understand the scope before we talk about next steps. This was not impulsive. This was not one bad decision made in a moment of weakness. He said it the way a doctor says a diagnosis, not gently, not harshly, but with the specific care of a person who has decided that clarity is more respectful than cushioning. This was systematic. 18 months of regular withdrawals, each one sized to stay below the threshold that triggers automatic bank alerts for unusual activity. $10,000 is the federal reporting threshold. That was the detail that settled into me the heaviest. Not the amounts, not even the destinations, but the sizing. Each transfer carefully kept below $10,000, the precise federal limit above which banks are required to file a currency transaction report with the government. Diane had known that number. She had structured every withdrawal around it with the patience and precision of someone who had thought it through completely, who had sat down at some point and done the math and decided exactly how much she could take and how often and in what amounts to avoid triggering any flag that might cause someone to look. My daughter had planned this the way an engineer plans a load-bearing structure, methodically, over time, with attention to every point of potential failure. I pressed my hand against my sternum again, that gesture I had developed in the past 48 hours, the one that had nothing to do with my heart valve, and everything to do with needing something solid to push against when the world became too large and too wrong to simply sit inside. There is one more category, Frank said. He opened a third tab. This one I want to walk through carefully because it involves a different type of account movement. He turned the screen slightly toward me. 4 transfers spread over 8 months, totaling $22,000. These did not go to credit cards or tuition or travel. They went to a single account, a personal checking account at Huntington Bank. He paused. The account holder is listed as a business entity called DM Consulting LLC, registered in Ohio. I ran the business registration, and I said, Frank took his reading glasses off and held them in one hand, which I had learned over 30 years was what he did when he was about to say something he had verified thoroughly and wished he had found differently. DM Consulting LLC was registered 14 months ago. The registered agent is Diane Marie Marsh. He set the glasses on the tray table. It has no employees, no client contracts on file, no business address beyond a post office box in Gahanna. It exists entirely on paper. It is in practical terms a shell, a structure designed to receive money and make it look on the surface like a legitimate business transaction. The room was very quiet. Outside in the corridor, a cart rolled past, wheels humming on linoleum, unhurried and indifferent to everything happening on the other side of my door. $22,000, I said, moved into a company she created specifically to receive it. Yes, Frank said. I thought about the word systematic. I turned it over in my mind the way you turn a bolt in your fingers before you put it to the thread. Checking for damage, checking whether it will hold. Systematic meant intentional. Systematic meant planned in advance. Systematic meant that at some point before any of this had begun, my daughter had sat somewhere and decided to do this and then had done it carefully and patiently for a year and a half, while calling me every Sunday and asking how I was feeling and whether I was eating enough. There is still the matter of the garage, Frank said quietly. I looked at him. Something in his tone had shifted, not the tone he used when delivering information, but something lower and older, the tone a man uses when he is about to hand you something that he knows will cost more than money to receive. Tell me, I said. Frank reached into the briefcase and produced a single sheet of paper. He did not hand it to me immediately. He held it flat on his palm for a moment as if weighing it. Walt, he said. How well do you remember signing documents in the spring of 2021? How well do you remember signing documents in the spring of 2021? Frank asked. I remembered that spring. I remembered it the way you remember any season that contains something you would rather forget, in pieces out of order with certain details sharper than they have any right to be, and others gone entirely. April of 2021. I had gone in for cataract surgery on my left eye routine. The ophthalmologist had said an outpatient procedure, you will be home by noon. I had been home by noon. My eye had been bandaged for 4 days, and during those 4 days, I had sat in the recliner in the living room on Marigold Drive watching television. I could not quite focus on, and eating the soup Diane had brought over in containers she stacked in the refrigerator with handwritten heating instructions on masking tape. She had been attentive that week. I remembered thinking so at the time. Thoughtful. She had come by twice, refilled the prescriptions, handled the mail, and on the third day had sat beside the recliner with a clipboard and said there were some routine documents from the hospital's billing department that needed my signature insurance coordination forms. She said so the secondary coverage could process properly. She had guided my hand to each signature line. I had signed where she pointed because I could not read the pages clearly, and I trusted her, and the soup was good, and I was tired, and my eye hurt. Frank set the sheet of paper on my tray table and turned it to face me. It was a deed transfer document. My name was on it, Walter James Calloway, printed in the appropriate legal field, and signed on the signature line in my own handwriting. The signature slightly less controlled than my usual one, the way signatures look when a person cannot see clearly and is relying on muscle memory rather than sight. Beside my signature was a notary stamp and seal. The notary's name was printed below: Raymond K. Aldis, Notary Public, Franklin County, Ohio. The property being transferred was listed by its parcel number, a number I recognized, the way I recognized my own Social Security number, because I had written it on forms and insurance documents and tax returns for 35 years. The garage on Granger Road. 4,000 square feet of commercial property that I had purchased in 1988 with a loan I had paid off in full by 2001, that I had worked in every weekday for 3 decades, that had my name on a sign above the door until 18 months ago, when apparently that sign had come down. The transfer was dated April 14, 2021. The receiving party was listed as GR Commercial Holdings, LLC. GR Commercial Holdings, I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. A property acquisition company, Frank said. I pulled their registration. They buy commercial properties, hold them for 12 to 18 months, and resell. They paid $85,000 for the garage. The sale closed 16 months ago. He paused. The proceeds went to a title company escrow account and were disbursed to the seller of record, which on paper is you. The money never reached me, I said. No, Frank said. It did not. I traced the disbursement. It went to an account I have not fully identified yet, but the routing number puts it at a regional credit union in Westerville. He made a note. Raymond Aldis, the notary on the deed, I ran his license. He has a disciplinary notation from 2019 for improperly notarizing a document without the signatory present. He's still licensed. His address of record puts him 2 streets over from Brandon Marsh's parents' house in Hilliard. I sat with that for a moment. The garage on Granger Road had been more than a business. I want to be precise about that, because I think it matters to understand what the loss of it actually meant, separate from the $85,000. Maggie and I had looked at that property on a cold Saturday in February of 1988, standing in the parking lot with our breath fogging in the air and the realtor talking about square footage and zoning classifications. And Maggie had looked at the building and then looked at me and said, "Walt, this is where it starts. Not the money. The thing you were always supposed to be doing with your hands." We had hung a photograph on the wall inside above the workbench along the north wall, a photograph from our wedding, the 2 of us on the steps of St. Anthony's on Livingston Avenue. Maggie laughing at something I had said a half-second before the shutter clicked. That photograph had been on that wall for 33 years. It had watched me work through recessions and slow seasons, and the year Diane was born, and the years Maggie was sick. It was the first thing I saw every morning when I unlocked the door, and the last thing I looked at before I turned off the lights. 18 months ago, without my knowledge, someone had taken it down. Tommy Briggs, Frank said, and something in my chest moved at the name Tommy, who had worked beside me for 12 years, who could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded, and who cried openly at Maggie's funeral without any embarrassment about it. He tried to reach you. 11 months ago, when the new ownership began renovation, he said he called your cell phone 3 times. No answer. Then he tried once more 6 months ago when he drove past and saw the sign had changed. "I never received those calls," I said. Frank's expression did not change, but his pen moved. "I checked your phone records with your carrier with your authorization from the POA. Tommy Briggs's number appears in your incoming call log on the dates he described." He looked at me. "It does not appear in your missed calls list. The calls were received and then deleted from your log." The room was quiet enough that I could hear the second hand of the clock on the wall above the whiteboard. Tick, tick, tick. Each one marking off another second of a life I was apparently only now beginning to understand the full dimensions of. Someone had deleted Tommy's calls from my phone. Someone who had regular access to my phone. Someone who brought soup in labeled containers and guided my hand to signature lines while my eye was bandaged, and I was tired, and I trusted her because she was my daughter, and I had held her when she was 2 days old, and she had smelled like something new and perfect, and I had believed with my whole unguarded heart that that meant something permanent. I pressed both palms flat against my thighs, and I breathed. "There is more," Frank said. He said it quietly, the way you say it, when you know the person you are talking to has just absorbed something large, and you are asking them to make room for something larger still. "I need to show you what I found regarding the Franklin County Court." I looked at the clock. The red second hand moved in its deliberate, indifferent arc. Outside the window, a cloud passed across the sun, and the room dimmed slightly, then brightened again as the cloud moved on. "Show me," I said. Frank reached into the briefcase and produced 2 more documents. He did not hand them to me immediately. He set them face down on the tray table, side by side, with the careful deliberateness of a man who has learned that the order in which you present information to a person under stress matters as much as the information itself. Then he looked at me and said, "I want to give you a moment before I show you these, because what I am about to tell you is not about money." "Just show me," I said again. He turned the first document over. It was a legal filing preparation, the kind that attorneys use when drafting a petition for submission to a county court. At the top, in standard legal typeface, were the words, "In the matter of the guardianship of Walter James Calloway, filed in Franklin County Probate Court. Petitioner Diane Marie Marsh." I read it twice. I read it the way I read an engine report when the findings are worse than the estimate, slowly making sure I understand every word before I allow myself to react to any of them. A guardianship petition, Frank explained, is a legal filing under Ohio Revised Code. Chapter 2111, which allows a family member or other interested party to ask a probate court to declare that an adult is no longer capable of managing their own affairs. If granted, the court appoints a guardian, in this case the petitioner, meaning Diane, who then assumes legal control over the subject's finances, property, and major life decisions. The subject of the petition, meaning me, retains the right to contest it at a hearing, but the burden shifts. I would need to demonstrate before a judge that I was competent. Not Diane. Me. "She filed this?" I asked. "She has not filed it yet," Frank said. "This is a draft. I found it through a legal database search. Her attorney of record submitted a preliminary inquiry to Franklin County Probate Court 6 weeks ago, requesting scheduling availability for an expedited competency hearing." He paused. Expedited means fast-tracked. It means they were planning to move quickly, likely timed to coincide with your surgery and recovery period, when your ability to respond would be most limited. 6 weeks ago. 6 weeks ago, Diane had been calling me every Sunday and asking whether I was eating enough and whether the nursing staff was treating me well. 6 weeks ago, while I lay in this bed, watching the maple tree outside my window and believing that my daughter was worried about me, she had been sitting in an attorney's office discussing the fastest legal mechanism available to strip me of the right to make my own decisions. My hands were steady on the blanket. I noticed that, and I was grateful for it, because inside my chest, something was happening that I did not have a clean name for, not anger, not grief, but something that combined elements of both and added a third thing underneath them, something older and quieter. The feeling of a structure you believed was solid shifting on its foundation in a way that makes you understand for the first time that it was never as solid as you thought. "The second document," I said. Frank turned it over. It was a printout of an email chain recovered, he explained, through the legal records request. Because Diane's attorney had copied a title company on a preliminary inquiry, and title company correspondence is part of the discoverable record in property transactions. The email chain was between Diane and a real estate broker named Gerald Foss, operating out of Newark, Ohio. which sits at the western edge of Licking County. The earliest email was dated 8 weeks ago. In it, Diane described a parcel of approximately 3 acres in Licking County, asked for a current market valuation, and inquired about the timeline for a quiet sale, meaning a sale conducted without public listing, directly to a buyer to minimize visibility. Gerald Foss had responded with an estimated value of between $380,000 and $420,000, depending on buyer and timeline. He had noted that agricultural-adjacent land in Licking County was moving quickly in the current market, and that he had 2 interested parties he could approach on a confidential basis. Diane had responded, "Perfect. Let's move forward carefully. We may need to wait for a change in the ownership situation before we can proceed formally, but I want everything ready to go when that window opens." A change in the ownership situation. I had bought that land in 2001 with the money left over after we paid off the garage loan. 3 acres in Licking County east of Columbus, bordered on one side by a creek that ran clear in the spring and slowed to a trickle by August. Maggie and I had driven out there on weekends sometimes in the years before she got sick and sat in the truck with the windows down and listened to the creek and not talked much, because there was nothing that needed saying. I had kept that land through every tight year and every slow season because I thought of it the way I thought of the floor money, not for spending, but for the having of it. The knowledge that it was there. I had thought in the back of my mind, in the way you think about things you have not said out loud, because saying them makes them too real and too sad simultaneously, that one day the land might go to Diane. Not as a transaction, as a gift. The kind of thing a father leaves because he spent his whole life trying to give his child a softer landing than the one he had. A change in the ownership situation. She had been watching the land the way a person watches something they have already decided belongs to them and are simply waiting for the paperwork to confirm it. She had been waiting for me to go into surgery, or to sign the guardianship documents, or to die, and whichever came first would open the window she needed. I set the email printout down on the blanket beside the deed transfer and the guardianship draft, and I looked at the 3 documents arranged there together, and I understood something that I had been circling for 2 days without being able to bring myself to land on it directly. This was not a series of bad decisions. This was not greed that had gotten out of hand, or a marriage that had exerted bad influence, or a daughter who had made mistakes she had not fully thought through. This was architecture. Every piece of it had been designed to fit with every other piece the authorized user access that allowed the withdrawals, the shell company that laundered the proceeds, the notarized deed transfer executed while I was half-blind and trusting the deleted phone calls from Tommy, the guardianship petition, timed for my surgical recovery, the real estate broker on standby in Newark. Each piece supported the others. Remove any one of them and the structure still held. It had been built to hold. I thought about Diane at 7 years old, sitting on an overturned bucket in the garage on Granger Road, handing me tools I asked for by name because I had taught her what each one was called. Socket wrench, torque wrench, needle nose pliers. She had been precise about it. Never handed me the wrong one. Even at 7. Walt. Frank's voice was quiet and even. I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer it honestly. I looked at him. Is there anyone, he said, that you trust completely, someone outside this situation? Someone Diane does not have access to? I thought about it for exactly 3 seconds. There might be, I said. But I need you to check something first. In the old files, from before Maggie died. Frank picked up his pen. Tell me what I'm looking for. Frank left at 11 that morning to make calls he said needed to be made from outside the room. I did not ask why. There are certain kinds of work that require privacy, not because the information is dangerous, but because the person doing the work needs to think without being watched. And Frank had always been that kind of worker. I had seen him pace the parking lot outside the bowling alley during phone calls back and forth, along the same 20 feet of asphalt, working through something in his mind, the way I worked through a difficult repair, by moving, by letting the body do something simple, while the brain did something complicated. I ate lunch from the hospital tray without tasting it. Pat came in to check my pressure and wrote the numbers on the whiteboard and said they were holding steady, which she seemed to find more remarkable than I did. I watched the clock. I watched the maple tree. I thought about Maggie, not the Maggie of the documents and the trust and the legal strategy, not yet. I thought about the Maggie of ordinary Tuesdays, the way she folded laundry with the television on always one episode behind on whatever show she was watching, because she refused to sit still for it. The way she kept a running grocery list on the back of an envelope she moved from purse to purse, so old and refolded that the paper had gone soft as cloth at the creases. The way she called me Walt in public and Walter only when she was making a point, and the point was always the same point: pay attention, you are about to miss something important. I had missed a great many things. I was beginning to understand the full dimensions of that. Frank came back at 2:15 in the afternoon. He was carrying the leather briefcase and a second cup of coffee, and his expression was different from when he had left, not dramatically, but in the register that I had learned to read over 34 years of friendship, the register that meant he had found something and was deciding how to carry it into the room. He sat down. He set the coffee on the tray table. He opened the briefcase and removed a manila envelope thick sealed with a metal clasp and set it between us without opening it. I reached Howard Bellamy, he said. Howard Bellamy was the attorney who had handled Maggie's estate, a quiet, careful man who had been in practice in Columbus for 40 years and who Maggie had chosen specifically. Frank had once told me because he reminded her of her father. He confirmed that he has been holding a document in his files under sealed instructions since 2018. The instructions specified that the document was not to be disclosed to any party, including you, unless you were facing a medical crisis of a life-threatening nature and had no other financial recourse available. I looked at the envelope. Howard drove it over himself, Frank said. He is retired, but he still handles certain ongoing matters for former clients. He said. Frank paused and something moved across his face that I had not seen there before. Something that in a man less controlled would have looked like the beginning of emotion. He said Maggie was the most organized client he ever had. He said she knew exactly what she was doing, and she made him go over the language 3 times to be certain it said precisely what she intended. I reached for the envelope. My hands were steady, which continued to surprise me. I unclasped the metal fastener and lifted the flap and reached inside. There were 2 things in the envelope. The first was a legal document, 12 pages stapled on the letterhead of Bellamy and Associates Attorneys at Law, Columbus, Ohio. At the top of the first page, in standard legal typeface, Margaret Ann Calloway, Medical Protection Trust. Established October 14, 2018. Grantor Margaret Ann Calloway. Trustee Howard J. Bellamy. Beneficiary Walter James Calloway. I turned to the asset schedule on page 4. The trust had been funded with $95,000 transferred from a savings account at Park National Bank in the name of Margaret Ann Calloway. An account in her name alone, established before our marriage with money her parents had left her money. I had known existed and had never touched, because Maggie had said once early on that she needed one thing that was entirely hers. Not because she did not trust me, but because every person needed one corner of their life that answered only to themselves. I had agreed without hesitation. I had never asked about the balance. She had been adding to it quietly for 41 years. $95,000, built from birthday money and Christmas money, and the small inheritance from her aunt in 2009, and decades of setting aside whatever was left from her substitute teaching checks during the years she went back to work when Diane was in middle school. $95,000 that Walt Calloway had never known existed, held in trust by a careful retired attorney, waiting for exactly the crisis that was currently happening. She had seen it coming. That was the thing I kept returning to as I sat in that hospital room with the document in my hands and the monitoring equipment recording my heartbeat and the maple tree doing whatever maples do in September. Maggie had seen it coming before I had been willing to look. She had known not the specifics, perhaps, but the shape of it, the general territory where the danger would come from, and she had prepared quietly and completely, without alarming me or accusing anyone or creating a conflict that would have torn the family apart while she was still alive, to live inside it. She had simply made certain that when the moment came, I would not be alone in it. I set the trust document down and looked at the second item in the envelope. It was a smaller envelope, standard letter size. Pale blue, sealed with a strip of tape that had dried and curled slightly at one edge the way tape does after 5 years, in a manila folder. On the front, in Maggie's handwriting, the careful schoolteacher's cursive I would have recognized in any context, on any surface, in any light, 4 words. For Walt. Fight back. I held the envelope in both hands, and I did not open it. Not yet. I was not ready yet, and Maggie had always understood the difference between the moment a thing needed to happen and the moment a person was ready for it to happen. She had never pushed. She had always known. Frank was looking at the window. He had turned his chair slightly, giving me the privacy of his averted gaze, which was one of the most considerate things I had ever seen a person do without being asked. "Frankus," I said. My voice came out rougher than I intended. He turned back. He looked at me over his reading glasses, and his expression was the expression of a man who has been a good friend for a very long time and knows when to speak and when to simply be present. "The 95,000, I said. "Is it accessible?" "Howard is initiating the transfer to a restricted medical account in your name today," Frank said. "It will be available within 48 hours, before your surgical deadline." I nodded. I looked down at the pale blue envelope in my hands. Outside the window, the afternoon light had shifted, coming in at a lower angle now, the kind of light that makes ordinary things look briefly luminous. The whiteboard with my numbers in blue marker, the clock with its red second hand, the maple tree with its leaves half-turned burning quietly at the edges in the September air. "There is someone," I said quietly to no one in particular, or perhaps to the woman whose handwriting I was holding. "There is someone who has been here the whole time." I opened the envelope at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Not because I was ready. I'm not sure I would ever have been ready in the way that word usually means. But Frank had stepped out again to make a call, and the room was quiet, and the pale blue envelope had been sitting on my tray table for 45 minutes, and at some point, a person has to stop standing at the edge of a thing and simply step into it. I worked the tape loose carefully, the way I would work a gasket free from an engine block, slowly, without tearing, because some things you only get to open once, and you want to do it right. Inside was a birthday card. The front showed a painted image of a lake at sunrise, the water going from dark at the edges to gold at the center, the kind of image that manages to be both peaceful and a little heartbreaking, depending on what you bring to it. I opened the card. Maggie's handwriting filled both inside panels, the careful schoolteacher's cursive running in straight lines without the aid of ruled paper the way it always had, because Maggie had the kind of hand that did not need guidelines to stay true. She had written, "Walt, if you are reading this, Then Howard finally opened that drawer, which means things have gotten serious enough that I was right to worry. I have been worrying for a long time, though I want you to know that the worrying never felt like dread. It felt like love with its work boots on. You have spent your whole life being the one people bring their broken things to. You fix what other people cannot figure out, and you never once complained about it, not in 41 years, not even on the days when I knew it cost you more than you let on. I need you to do one thing for me now, Walt. Let someone fix yours. You have earned that. You have earned it 1,000 times over, and you never collected. Collect now. Fight. Not for me, because I am fine wherever I am and I am not worried about myself. Fight for the version of your life that comes after this. It exists. I promise you it exists. I picked out the curtains for it already. All my love always. Maggie. P.S. There is $95,000 in a trust with Howard's name on it. Do not argue with me about it. I had 41 years to save it, and I knew what I was saving it for. I sat with the card in my hands for a long time. I am not a man who cries easily. I want to be honest about that without making it sound like a virtue, because it is not a virtue. It is simply a fact about how I was built, and how 32 years of shop work reinforced the building. But sitting in that hospital room in the September afternoon light, holding a birthday card that my wife had bought and written and sealed and left with her attorney 5 years ago, 3 days before she died, with a postscript about $95,000 that was so entirely, perfectly, irreducibly Maggie that it broke something open in me that I had not known was closed. I cried. I pressed the card flat against my chest, and I cried the way a man cries when he has been holding something very heavy for a very long time and has finally been given permission to set it down. Not loudly, not dramatically, just steadily, the way rain falls when there is no wind to perform for. I do not know how long it lasted. Long enough that the afternoon light moved a few degrees across the floor. Long enough that my pressure monitor registered something and then settled again when I breathed through it. When I looked up, Frank was standing in the doorway. He had come back in without my noticing. He looked at me and I looked at him, and neither of us said anything for a moment, because some moments do not need language, and both of us were old enough to know which ones those were. Then he said quietly, "She wrote to you." "She wrote to me," I said. He nodded once and moved to his chair and sat down and picked up his legal pad, giving me back the forward motion of the work, which was exactly the right thing to do. A knock came at the door. Soft, tentative, the knock of someone who is not certain they are welcome. "Come in," I said. The woman who opened the door was in her mid-70s, small-framed with white hair, cut short and practical, and reading glasses hanging from a beaded chain around her neck. She was wearing a tan cardigan over a floral blouse, and she was holding a plain white envelope against her chest, with both hands pressing it there. The way a person presses something they have been carrying for too long and are not yet sure they are ready to give up. She looked at me, and her eyes were red at the edges in the particular way that eyes get when a person has been crying on and off for most of a day and has stopped apologizing to themselves about it. "Walt," she said. Her voice was soft and a little unsteady. "I don't know if you remember me. I'm Eleanor Stubbs. I used to live next door to you on Marigold Drive. I've been in the house on the left for 22 years. I remembered her. Not with the sharp clarity of someone I had known well, but with the comfortable familiarity of a neighbor. Someone whose porch light you have noted, and whose car you recognize in the driveway, and whose name you know without having had to learn it deliberately. Eleanor. She had brought a casserole when Maggie died. 2 casseroles, actually. I remembered because Diane had made a comment about it being excessive, and I had thought at the time that there was no such thing as an excessive casserole when a man had just lost his wife. "I remember you," I said. "Please come in, Eleanor." She stepped inside. She looked at Frank, who introduced himself quietly as Walt's attorney, and she nodded as if this confirmed something she had been expecting. She looked at the envelope in her hands. Then she looked at me, and her chin trembled once before she steadied it, the visible effort of a woman who has decided to be brave about something that is costing her. "Maggie was my friend," she said, "for 20 years. My closest friend after my sister moved to Arizona." She swallowed. "I have something I should have brought you sooner. I tried once about 2 years ago, and you didn't want to hear it. I understood. I didn't push. But I can't not say it now, Walt. I can't watch what's happening and stay quiet anymore." She held the envelope out toward me with both hands, the way you offer something you have been guarding carefully and are relieved to finally give to its rightful owner. "She would want you to know," Eleanor said. "Maggie would absolutely want you to know." I took the envelope from Eleanor's hands. She sat down in the chair beside the bed, the one Frank usually occupied, and folded her hands in her lap, and looked at me with the expression of a person who has rehearsed what they are going to say so many times that the rehearsal has become a kind of exhaustion. Frank moved quietly to the windowsill and stood there with his arms crossed, giving the two of us the center of the room without leaving it. 2 years ago, Eleanor began her voice finding its steadiness as she went the way a person's voice does when they have decided to say a hard thing and have committed fully to the saying of it. "I knocked on your door on a Saturday morning. You were home. You answered in your work clothes, the green ones you always wore when you were doing something in the yard." She paused. "I told you I had seen Diane at the house twice that week while you were out. That I had seen her loading things from the garage into her car. Large things. Equipment, it looked like. I remembered that Saturday. Not clearly, not in detail, but the shape of it." Eleanor at the door. Me with a cup of coffee going cold in my hand. The particular impatience I had felt the morning already half gone, a project half finished in the yard. "I told you to mind your own business," I said. It came out flat because it was true, and I was too tired for softening. Eleanor's mouth pressed together briefly. "You did. In nicer words than that, but yes. You said Diane was helping you organize some things, that she had your permission, and that you appreciated my concern." She unfolded her hands and refolded them. "I went home and I told myself you were right, that it was not my place, that people have complicated relationships with their children, and I was not inside yours, and I should stay on my side of the property line." She looked at me steadily. "I told myself that for 2 years, and then I heard from the woman at the pharmacy on Livingston that you were in the hospital waiting for heart surgery, and I stopped being able to tell myself anything anymore." I opened the envelope. Inside were 17 receipts folded and organized with the methodical care of a woman who had once been a middle school librarian. Eleanor told me this later, unprompted, the way people share the credentials of their own reliability, arranged in chronological order, earliest on top, each one paper-clipped to a small index card with a date and a brief handwritten note in blue ink. The first receipt was dated 19 months ago. A rental truck from the U-Haul location on Morse Road in Columbus. Eleanor's note read, "Thursday afternoon. D arrived alone, backed truck to garage side door. 3 men with her I did not recognize. Loaded for approximately 2 hours." The second was a photograph, not a receipt, printed on standard copy paper, from a phone image slightly grainy but clear enough. It showed the exterior of the garage on Granger Road from across the street. The sign above the door, Callaway Auto, the letters I had painted myself in the summer of 2002, dark green on white, was gone. In its place was bare wood lighter than the surrounding paint, a rectangle of absence that was more visible than any sign could have been. Eleanor's note on the index card read, "Took this October of last year. Sign was gone. Could not reach you by phone. Tried twice." I looked at the photograph for a long time. Then I set it face down on the blanket, because I needed to keep moving through the envelope, and I could not do that, and look at the sign at the same time. The remaining 15 items were a combination of receipts and photographs, each documented with the same quiet precision. A receipt from a storage facility on Dublin Granville Road, a unit rented in the name of GR Commercial Holdings. The same shell company Frank had identified, paid for 18 months in advance. A photograph of Diane's car in the driveway of the Granger Road property on a weekday afternoon trunk. Open a man in work clothes carrying a cardboard box out the side door. A receipt from a locksmith on Cleveland Avenue, new locks installed at the commercial property at 3441 Granger Road, dated 3 days after the U-Haul rental. New locks. 3 days after the first truck. She had moved, the contents changed the locks, and been ready to transfer the deed within the month. Each step following the previous one with the efficiency of a plan that had been rehearsed well in advance. "Eleanor," Frank said from the windowsill, and his voice had the particular quality it got when he was thinking faster than he was speaking. "The men who helped with the truck. Did you get a look at any of them?" "One of them," Eleanor said. She reached into the pocket of her cardigan and produced a small notebook, the kind with a spiral at the top, the kind teachers use. She opened it to a marked page. "I wrote down a partial plate number from the truck. I know it sounds—" She hesitated, and something in her face went briefly uncertain, as if she was worried about being thought foolish. "I know it sounds like I was prying. But Maggie asked me once, years before she got sick. She said, 'Eleanor, if anything ever seems wrong over there, pay attention.' She said it exactly like that. Pay attention." So I did. Frank crossed the room in 4 steps and looked at the notebook page she held open. He wrote the partial plate in his legal pad without being asked. I set the last of the 17 items on the blanket beside the others, and looked at what Eleanor had assembled over 19 months of watching and waiting and not knowing whether she would ever have the occasion to use it. 17 pieces of evidence gathered by a 74-year-old retired librarian who had kept a spiral notebook and paper-clipped index cards to receipts because her friend had told her to pay attention, and she had taken that instruction seriously for the rest of Maggie's life, and for every year after. My throat was tight. I pressed my hands flat on the blanket and breathed through it. "Eleanor," I said, "why did you keep all of this for 2 years after I turned you away? Why did you keep it?" She looked at me with an expression that was simple and direct and did not require any elaboration, but she gave me the elaboration anyway because she was that kind of person. "Because Maggie kept 22 years of birthday cards for my children," she said. "Every single one. She never forgot a date. When she died, your daughter brought me a shoebox with all of them inside." Her voice steadied on the last sentence, as though the steadying required effort. "Some debts you pay forward, Walt. You pay them to whoever needs them most when the time comes." My phone buzzed on the tray table. I looked at the screen. A call from Diane. I let it ring. Then it stopped. Then 30 seconds later, a text message appeared on the screen. "Dad, I heard you might have found some additional financial resources for the surgery. I want to help. Can I come by tomorrow morning?" I set the phone face down. Frank looked at me from across the room. "She knows about the trust," he said. It was not a question. "It appears so," I said. She arrived at 9 in the morning, which told me something. Diane had never been an early riser. Through her entire childhood, getting her out of bed before 8 on a weekend had required 3 separate attempts, and occasionally the threat of cold water. The fact that she was standing in my doorway at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, fully dressed, hair done, carrying a large bunch of sunflowers wrapped in craft paper, told me that she had been awake for a while, and that this visit had been prepared for the way you prepare for a presentation, with attention to every visible detail. She smiled when she saw me. It was a good smile. I will give her that. Whatever else Diane had become, or perhaps had always been beneath the surface, I had chosen to see she had inherited her mother's smile, the kind that started in the eyes before it reached the mouth, the kind that looked, if you did not know what you were looking for, entirely genuine. "Morning, Dad." She came in and set the sunflowers on the tray table, leaning down to kiss my cheek in the same motion, smooth and practiced. I thought these might brighten up the room a little. I looked at the sunflowers. Maggie had been allergic to sunflower pollen, severely the kind of allergic that meant sunflowers never came into our house, not once in 41 years of marriage. Diane had grown up knowing this. She had known it the way she knew her own birthday, and the combination to the lock on her high school locker. It was not the kind of thing a person forgets. It was the kind of thing a person stops thinking about when the person the rule existed for is no longer there to be protected. I said nothing about the sunflowers. I noted them, and I moved on. "Sit down, Diane," I said. She sat in the visitor's chair and crossed her ankles and arranged her expression into something that combined concern and warmth in what I now recognized as carefully calibrated proportions. The leather tote bag she had carried on Wednesday was gone. In its place was a smaller bag canvas, the kind that looks casual and turns out to be anything but. "I've been thinking about you so much," she said. "I know things got tense the other day, and I want you to know that I understand why. You're under enormous pressure, Dad. The surgery, the finances, all of it. It's a lot for anyone to carry alone." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on her knees, the posture of sincerity. "I said some things that came out wrong. I want to do better." I waited. When a person is performing, the performance eventually requires an audience response to continue. I had learned this in the shop. Certain customers would talk themselves all the way to the truth if you simply declined to interrupt them. Diane held the posture for 3 seconds. Then, when I did not respond, she reached into the canvas bag and produced a manila folder. She set it on the tray table beside the sunflowers and opened it to the first page, turning it to face me with both hands, the gesture of a person presenting something they consider a gift. "I had this drawn up by our attorney," she said. "It's a durable power of attorney standard language, nothing complicated. It just means that while you're recovering from surgery, I can handle the day-to-day financial decisions. Pay bills, manage the accounts, make sure nothing falls through the cracks while you're focused on getting better." She smoothed the top page with her palm. "It's what families do, Dad. It's just paperwork." I looked at the document. A durable power of attorney, unlike the limited version Frank had drawn up for himself, does not expire when a specific task is complete. It does not restrict the attorney, in fact, to a defined scope of activity. A durable power of attorney in the state of Ohio gives the named agent broad legal authority to act on behalf of the principal in financial and legal matters, and it remains in effect even if the principal becomes incapacitated. It is in practical terms a transfer of control, not temporary, not limited. A door that opens fully and does not have a guaranteed mechanism for closing. I had not been a lawyer for 32 years, but I had been a careful man, and Frank had explained this distinction to me on Wednesday, with enough clarity that I could have explained it to someone else. "Who is named as my agent in this document?" I asked. "I am," Diane said. "Just me, to keep it simple." And Brandon, a flicker. Small, fast, the flicker of a calculation made and adjusted in real time. Brandon could be named as a backup, if that would make you feel better. But really, Dad, this is just to protect you while... The door opened. Brandon stepped in, without knocking, the same entrance he had made 2 days prior. The same absence of any acknowledgement that the room belonged to someone other than himself. He was wearing a different shirt, but the same expression, the one that sat between impatience and ownership. The expression of a man who had decided at some point well before entering that this situation was already resolved, and he was simply here to collect the confirmation. He looked at the folder open on the tray table. He looked at me. Something moved in a satisfaction he did not fully suppress, the way a person cannot fully suppress the expression of a thing they have been looking forward to. "Morning, Walt." He said the same greeting as before. My name dropped without ceremony. "Brandon," I said. He pulled the spare chair from the corner without asking, and sat down beside Diane, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched, close enough that the message was clear even without words. "We are a unit. This is our position. Sign the paper." Look," he said, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees in a mirror of Diane's posture, though on him the gesture looked less like sincerity and more like the stance a man takes when he is about to make an argument he expects to win. "I know there's been tension. That's family. But at the end of the day, Dee is your daughter. She wants to take care of you. The document is protection, not control. There's a difference." I looked at Brandon. I thought about the voicemail. 47 seconds of his real voice talking about me, the way a person talks about a problem they are close to solving. Old Walt's not going to make it past the surgery anyway. I looked at his face now, the practiced ease of it, the confidence that comes from a man who has not yet considered the possibility that the thing he came for might not be available to him. Pat appeared in the doorway. She looked at the room, Brandon in the corner chair, Diane with the open folder, the sunflowers on the tray table, and her expression did not change in any way a person could have pointed to and described. But I had been watching Pat's face for 3 weeks, and I could read it the way I could read an engine light, by what it was not saying as much as what it was. She stepped fully into the room, picked up my chart from the hook by the door, and began reviewing it with her back to Brandon in a way that was not accidental. Diane slid the manila folder half an inch closer to me across the tray table. She picked up the pen that had been clipped to the inside cover and held it out. "It's just your signature, Dad," she said softly. "That's all." I looked at the pen in her hand. I looked at the sunflowers. I looked at Brandon, who was watching me with the focused attention of a man reading a closing. And I felt in the room the particular pressure of a moment that has been engineered to feel inevitable. The folder opened, the pen extended, the family present, the patient alone in the bed with nowhere to go. Then the door opened again. Frank Dellinger walked in, carrying his briefcase. His reading glasses pushed up on his forehead. His expression the same unhurried, settled calm it always was. He looked at Diane. He looked at Brandon. He looked at the open folder on the tray table and the pen in Diane's outstretched hand. He set his briefcase on the floor beside the window. He pulled up the remaining chair. He sat down, opened the briefcase across his knees, and looked at Diane with the specific patience of a man who has all the time in the world and a great deal of paper. "Good morning," Frank said pleasantly. "Please don't let me interrupt." Before I reveal the ultimate confrontation and every piece of evidence, drop the number 100 in the comments to let me know you're still here with me. And please note the following part includes some fictional elements. If you prefer not to hear it, you can turn off the video right now. Frank did not hurry. That was the first thing I noticed. The absolute absence of urgency in the way he moved. He opened the briefcase across his knees with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything, the precision of a man who has learned over 50 years of legal practice, that the person who controls the pace of a room controls the room. He removed a series of folders, each one labeled in his small, neat handwriting, and set them on the tray table in a row beside the open power of attorney document and the sunflowers and the pen Diane was still holding. He looked at Diane pleasantly. "I'm Frank Dellinger," he said. "I'm Walt's attorney of record as of Wednesday morning. I have a limited power of attorney on file with Fifth Third Bank and a legal services agreement signed by Walt." He said it the way you state the weather, factual, uncontested, not requiring a response. Then he opened the first folder. "I thought it might be useful," Frank said, "to have everything in one place." He placed the first document on the tray table facing Diane. It was the bank transaction history, 11 pages, every transfer from the savings account, over 18 months, each one highlighted in yellow, each one with a notation in the margin identifying the destination account and the merchant records Frank had traced. Diane looked at it. Her hand, the one holding the pen, lowered by approximately 2 inches. Frank placed the second document beside the first. The Shell Company registration for DM Consulting LLC, Diane Marie Marsh, registered agent, Post Office Box in Gahanna, no employees, no client contracts, no operational history beyond receiving $22,000 from Walt's savings account in 4 transfers over 8 months. Brandon shifted in his chair. It was a small movement, a weight adjustment, the kind a person makes when a room begins to feel different from how it felt when they entered it. Frank placed the third document, the deed transfer for the garage on Granger Road, Walt's signature at the bottom. The notary stamp of Raymond K. Aldis, the date in April of 2021, 4 days after Walt's cataract surgery. Frank had paper-clipped to it a single-page printout, Raymond Aldis's disciplinary record from the Ohio Notary Commission, the notation from 2019 for improperly notarizing a document without the signatory present, and his registered address in Hilliard, 2 streets from Brandon's parents' house. Diane set the pen down on the tray table. She set it down carefully, without sound, the way you set something down when you are no longer certain what your hands should be doing. Frank placed the fourth document. The draft guardianship petition in the matter of the guardianship of Walter James Calloway. Petitioner Diane Marie Marsh, Franklin County Probate Court, expedited hearing request, submitted 6 weeks prior. He placed beside it the email chain between Diane and Gerald Foss, the real estate broker in Newark. The estimated value of the Licking County land, $380,000 to $420,000, and Diane's response. "Let's move forward carefully. We may need to wait for a change in the ownership situation." Frank placed the fifth document, Eleanor Stubbs's 17 receipts and photographs organized in chronological order, each one paper-clipped to its index card. The U-Haul receipt. The photograph of the sign missing from above the garage door. The locksmith receipt, dated 3 days after the first truck. The partial plate number from Eleanor's spiral notebook transcribed in Frank's handwriting. Frank placed the sixth and final document. A printed transcript of the voicemail, 47 seconds, date and time. Stamped with a notation at the bottom, audio file, preserved in original format, forwarded to secure email account, September of 2023, chain of custody intact. He folded his hands on top of the closed briefcase and looked at Diane with an expression that was neither unkind nor sympathetic. It was the expression of a man who has presented the facts and is prepared to wait as long as necessary for them to be acknowledged. The room was quiet for a moment that lasted longer than it should have. Brandon broke it. He leaned forward in his chair, jaw tight. The ease of his earlier manner entirely gone, replaced by something harder and less practiced. "This is harassment," he said. You can't just come in here and... Brandon? Walt's voice. My voice. It came out quieter than I expected and steadier, and it stopped him the way a hand on a throttle stops an engine, not violently, just completely. He looked at me. I looked back at him. I thought about 47 seconds. I thought about old Walt's not going to make it past the surgery anyway. I thought about the sign above the garage door and the tray table in the hospital room where I had been lying for 3 weeks, and the floor money I had built for 30 years, and the woman who had loved me well enough to prepare for my worst day from 5 years in the future, and a parking lot she would never stand in again. I looked at my daughter. Diane's face had gone through several expressions in the past 4 minutes, moving through them the way weather moves through a sky. The confidence of arrival, the flicker of recalculation, the careful neutral of someone buying time. And now something I had not seen on her face since she was very young, since the years before she learned that vulnerability was a liability and a controlled surface was a strategy. She looked for a moment like the girl who used to sit on an overturned bucket in the garage and hand me tools by name. She looked like someone who knew she had gone too far and could not find the distance back. I did not reach for the distance on her behalf. I had done that her whole life. I was finished doing that. Diane, I said. My voice was level and quiet, and did not require any particular effort to keep that way, which told me something about where I had arrived in the past 72 hours. I need you to take your paperwork and leave this room. Her chin moved. A small tremor quickly controlled. Dad, I'm not angry, I said. And I meant it, which surprised me less than it would have a week ago. Anger requires a kind of hope, the belief that the thing you are angry about could have gone differently, that someone might still change. I had stopped believing that sometime between the voicemail and the sunflowers. What I felt instead was something older and quieter. The feeling of a door closing, not slamming. Simply closing with a soft and final click, the way well-made things close when they reach the end of their travel. I am not angry. I am finished. Brandon stood up. His chair scraped the floor. You'll regret this, he said, and his voice had the quality of a man who is not accustomed to leaving a room without the thing he came for. You're alone in here. You think that lawyer is going to be around forever? You think, Mr. Marsh. Frank's voice, calm as a closing argument. I would encourage you to stop speaking. Brandon looked at Frank. Frank looked back with the patience of a man who has outlasted a great many louder people in a great many smaller rooms. Brandon's mouth closed. Diane stood. She gathered the power of attorney folder from the tray table without looking at it, tucked it under her arm, and picked up her canvas bag. She did not look at the sunflowers. She did not look at the 6 folders Frank had arranged in a row. She looked at me once for a long moment, with an expression I could not fully read and did not try to, and then she walked to the door. Brandon followed her without another word. The door closed behind them. Pat, who had been standing at the far end of the room reviewing my chart for the past 4 minutes, without turning around, set the chart back on its hook, looked at me and said, "Your pressure is going to be elevated after that. I'm going to check it in 10 minutes." She walked out, pulling the door halfway closed behind her, giving Frank and me the room. Frank looked at me from across the tray table, the 6 folders still arranged in their row between us. "Well?" he said. "Well," I said. Pat came back in 10 minutes later as promised and checked my pressure. She looked at the reading, looked at me, and wrote the numbers on the whiteboard without comment. Then she looked at the 6 folders still arranged in a row on the coat table at Frank, sitting beside the window with his legal pad at the sunflowers that nobody had moved, and she said, "Do you want me to get rid of those?" She meant the sunflowers. "Please," I said. She picked them up by the craft paper wrapping and carried them out without ceremony, the way a nurse removes things from a patient's room that are not contributing to recovery. The door swung shut behind her. The room felt immediately cleaner without them, the way a garage feels cleaner after you have identified the source of a leak and dealt with it directly. Frank set his legal pad on the tray table and uncapped his pen. "Ready?" he said. "Tell me what I'm signing," I said. "All of it. In order." He nodded. He had expected nothing less, and would have been concerned if I had said anything different. He opened the first folder. "First document," he said. "Revocation of any and all powers of attorney previously granted to Diane Marie Marsh or Brandon Marsh, effective immediately upon signing. Ohio law requires this to be notarized and delivered to any institution where the prior authorization was registered. I have a notary meeting us here at 11 o'clock. He set the page in front of me. "Read it." I read it. It said exactly what he had described. I signed it. Second document. Amendment to your existing will removing Diane Marie Marsh as primary beneficiary and sole executor. In her place, you have named Frank Dellinger as executor and a charitable remainder trust as primary beneficiary with specific bequests to be determined by you during recovery. He paused. You don't have to decide the bequests today. The amendment simply removes her from the position while you consider the rest. I thought about the land in Licking County. 3 acres bordered by a creek that ran clear in the spring. I thought about what it might become in the hands of someone who would use it for something other than profit. Can I designate a specific use for the land separately? Yes, Frank said. We can add a codicil after the surgery when you have more time. For now, the amendment protects it from any claim Diane might attempt to make. He set the page in front of me. Read it. I read it. I signed it. Third document. A formal instruction to Fifth Third Bank revoking Diane's authorized user status on the savings account, effective immediately with a request to flag any further attempts to access the account from her credentials. He paused. The account has $58,000 remaining. After the medical trust transfer clears tomorrow, you will have sufficient funds for the surgical balance and a reasonable amount beyond. I signed it. Fourth document. Authorization for me to file a civil complaint against Diane Marie Marsh and Brandon Marsh for financial exploitation of an elderly adult under Ohio Revised Code, Section 2111.59, conversion of personal property and fraud in the inducement of a real estate transaction. He looked at me over his reading glasses. I want to be clear about what this means in practical terms, Walt. Civil litigation is slow. It is expensive even on contingency. And it is public. Your family's finances will be part of the court record. I understand, I said. And you want to proceed? I thought about Tommy Briggs calling my number 4 times and the calls disappearing before I ever saw them. I thought about Raymond Aldis and his notary stamp and his address 2 streets from Brandon's parents' house. I thought about the word systematic, which I had turned over in my mind like a bolt in my fingers 2 days ago and had not been able to put down since. I want to proceed, I said. I signed it. Frank gathered the 4 documents and slid them into a folder marked with the day's date. He closed the briefcase and set it beside his chair. Then he looked at me with the expression he got when the formal part of a conversation was finished and the human part was beginning. "How are you feeling?" he said. "Like a man who just did 4 things he should have done 2 years ago," I said. Frank almost smiled. That's about right. My phone rang on the tray table. The screen showed a number I did not recognize at first, Columbus area code, but not a contact in my list. I picked it up. "This is Walt," I said. "Walt." The voice on the other end was rough and immediate, the voice of a man who talks the way he works, directly, without preamble, with no particular concern for whether he is interrupting anything. "It's Tommy Briggs. Frank Dellinger called me this morning, said you might want to hear from me directly." Tommy, 12 years beside me at the shop, the man who could rebuild a carburetor blindfolded and who had cried at Maggie's funeral without any embarrassment about it. His voice on my phone after 18 months of deleted calls hit me somewhere below the sternum in a way I had not anticipated. "Tommy," I said, "I'm glad you called. I tried to reach you," he said, and the roughness in his voice shifted slightly, became something more complicated. "I drove past the shop in October of last year, and the sign was gone, and I called you 3 times and nothing. I thought maybe you'd sold it and didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to push." A pause. The sound of a man working through something he has been carrying for a while. "I should have pushed." "You couldn't have known," I said. "I knew something was wrong," Tommy said. "I just didn't know what to do with knowing it." Another pause. "Frank says you might need me to testify about the sign, about the calls, about what I saw when I drove past." His voice steadied on the last sentence. "I'll do it, Walt. Whatever you need. You gave me 12 years of work, and you paid me honest, and you never once made me feel like anything less than a partner. Whatever you need." My throat tightened in the particular way it does when a person says something true and simple after a long stretch of things that were neither. "Thank you, Tommy," I said. "Don't thank me," Tommy said. "Just get through the surgery. The rest we'll sort out after." I set the phone down on the blanket and sat with the quiet of the room for a moment. The whiteboard showed my numbers in Pat's blue marker. The clock showed 10:47. The 6 folders sat in Frank's briefcase, signed and dated and ready. Frank was watching me with the patience he always had, the patience of a man who understood that sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is simply remain present while another person arrives at wherever they are going. The door opened. Pat stepped in, chart in hand, and looked at me with the particular expression she reserved for information she considered important. "Mr. Calloway," she said, "Dr. Whitfield asked me to let you know. The financial clearance came through this afternoon. The surgery is confirmed for tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock. She paused. "You should try to sleep tonight." I looked at the clock. I looked at the whiteboard. I looked at Frank, who was already reaching for his briefcase with the manner of a man who has finished his work for the day and is satisfied with what it amounts to. "I will," I said. The ward went quiet after 8 o'clock. Not silent hospitals are never silent. There is always the monitoring equipment and the distant sound of carts and the low murmur of the nurses' station down the hall. But quiet in the way that matters, the way that means visiting hours are over and the day has finished making demands, and whatever is left belongs only to the person lying in the bed. I had asked Pat to bring me the photo album from my bag, a small one, the kind that holds 40 pictures in plastic sleeves that I had packed, without fully deciding why. I sat with it open on my knees and went through it the way I had gone through the bank statements 2 days ago, slowly and without looking away from anything. Maggie at 26, standing in front of the building on Granger Road the week we signed the lease, one hand shading her eyes from the sun, laughing at something I had said. Maggie and me at a picnic table somewhere in Licking County, the creek visible behind us, both of us. Younger than I can quite reconcile with who I am now. Diane at 7, sitting on the overturned bucket in the garage, holding a socket wrench in both hands with the concentration of someone performing a task of genuine importance. I looked at that last one for a long time. Then I turned the page. Frank knocked at 8:30. He came in carrying the pale blue envelope which I had left on the tray table when the notary arrived, and had not thought about since. "You forgot this," he said. He set it on the blanket beside my hand, and stood there for a moment in the way he stood when he was deciding whether to say something or leave it alone. "Stay a minute," I said. He sat. We did not talk about the surgery or the documents or Diane. We talked about a bowling game in 1989 that Frank still insists he won on a technicality and that I maintain was a clear foul. We talked for 20 minutes the way old friends talk when they have run out of crisis and arrived back at each other. Then Frank stood, buttoned his jacket, picked up his briefcase, and said goodnight in the simple way that means everything is handled and you are allowed to rest. After he left, I picked up the pale blue envelope. I read Maggie's words one more time. Not for information, I had them memorized by now, every line. I read them the way you return to a thing that has done you good, the way you go back to a song or a stretch of road that has always made sense of something. You spent your whole life fixing other people's broken things. It's okay to let someone fix yours for once. Fight. I folded the card carefully and slid it into the breast pocket of my hospital gown, as close to the chest as it would go. Pat looked in at 10 o'clock. She saw the album closed on the tray table and the room quiet, and my eyes open, and said nothing beyond checking the monitor. At the door she paused. "Mr. Calloway," she said. "For what it's worth, I've been a nurse for 26 years. The patients who go into surgery with something worth coming back to do better than the ones who don't." She paused. "Just an observation." She turned off the overhead light and left the door half open, the corridor light falling across the floor in a long, pale rectangle. I closed my eyes. For the first time in 11 days, I did not lie there listening to the sound of the monitoring equipment and thinking about all the things I had not yet resolved. I lay there in the dark, with my wife's words against my chest, and my friend's voice still in the room and the surgery 6 hours away. And I thought about the creek in Licking County and the way the light came off it in the early morning, and I slept. The ceiling was white, and the light was soft, and somewhere outside the window, Columbus was waking up without knowing or caring that this particular morning was different from any other. Pat was there when they came with the gurney. She checked my monitor one last time and wrote the final numbers on the whiteboard in her square blue capitals, and she looked at me the way she had looked at me every morning for 3 weeks. Steady, professional, entirely present, and said, "Ready, Mr. Calloway?" "Ready," I said. They wheeled me down the corridor with the ceiling tiles sliding past overhead one after another, the same way time moves when you stop arguing with it. Dr. Whitfield met us at the surgical suite doors, already in his cap and gown, and he walked beside the gurney for the last 20 feet and said without looking down at his chart, "You did everything right this week, Mr. Calloway. The rest is mine." I reached into my breast pocket. The card was still there. Maggie's handwriting under my fingers, soft as worn cloth. The doors opened. I woke up in the recovery room at 11:43 in the morning. I know the time because the first thing I did was look for a clock, and there was one on the wall, and the red second hand was moving in its steady, indifferent arc, the same as it always had, the same as it always would. Frank was in the chair by the window. He was asleep, his reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, his briefcase on the floor beside his feet. He had been there long enough to fall asleep, which told me everything I needed to know about what kind of friend he was. I pressed my hand against my chest. The card was still there. Outside the window, it was a clear September morning in Columbus, Ohio. The maple tree had turned another degree overnight more orange than green, now the color spreading inward toward the center patient, and inevitable the way good things come, when you have finally stopped standing in their way. I was alive. I was 68 years old, and my name was Walter James Calloway, and I was alive. That was enough to start with. I spent 68 years believing that love was something you earned by being useful, by fixing things, by never asking for anything back. I was wrong about that, and it almost cost me everything. This is a grandpa story about what happens when the people you trust most become the people you should have watched most carefully. Every family story carries a version of this warning somewhere inside it, the slow leak you ignore until the engine fails completely. If I could tell my younger self one thing, it would be this. Do not wait until you are in a hospital bed to read the gauges. Check your accounts. Know your documents. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong. Do not let love make you blind to what the numbers are actually saying. I believe God puts certain people in our lives at exactly the right moment. Frank, Eleanor, Pat, Maggie, even from 5 years away. This grandpa story ends with me alive, which is more than I deserved for how long I kept my eyes closed. Every family story has a person who does the quiet work of holding things together. Make sure that person is not being taken for granted. If this grandpa story reached you today, leave a comment, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and subscribe so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying until the end. The stories ahead contain fictional elements created for educational purposes. If that is not the content you are looking for, we respect your choice to find something that fits you better.